Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is, and welcome to the Erickson Report. I'm your host. My name is Larry Erickson, and for the next almost half hour, I'm going to be talking about something kind of special. This show is going to be on in the weeks leading up to the Christmas, New Year's holiday season, and so I'm taking kind of a break from politics to deal with just two questions which I'm sure just burn in your mind every year around this time. Why is Christmas on December 25th as opposed to any other day of the year? And why is New Year's Day January 1st as opposed to any other day of the year? Now, as always, if you have any comments, questions, or reactions to the show, you can email them to me directly. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. And if you didn't catch that, you can go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. And you can get the email address from there, or actually you can leave a comment there if you'd rather do it that way. If you do send me email, as always, one request, please include something in the subject line, makes it clear this is about the show, it's not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer because I'm just so bad at answering my email. All right, to answer our first question about Christmas, about why it's on December 25th as opposed to being, I don't know, in June or something, right at the top, you have to realize something. Based on how we celebrate the season, and by that I mean Americans and maybe even to a greater extent Europeans, based on how we celebrate the season, we engage in our traditions, based on that, this is Christmas, and this is Christmas, and this is Christmas, and this, and this, and this. But this is not. Because you know those people who go around saying that Jesus is the reason for the season? He isn't, and he never was. Now that half of you are composing nasty emails to me, let me try to explain. The season is because of astronomical patterns. Until relatively recently, people were much more aware of the movements of the sun and the moon and the stars than we are now, and unless you're a dedicated stargazer or an astronomer. Such movements were necessary to them. They were signs of the changing of the seasons, of when to plant, of when to reap, when rains were coming, when game will be plentiful. The sky was their almanac. It was their seasonal calendar. Some of that awareness lives on in popular mythology, popular expressions. For example, did you ever wonder why the hot and humid days of July and August are still sometimes referred to as the dog days? Well, ancient people realized by their observations of the stars that the star which we call Sirius, which is the brightest star in the constellation Canis Major, that Sirius was at its highest in the sky in the middle of the night in the middle of winter, which they realized also meant it was at its highest point in the sky in the middle of the day in the middle of summer. Now, Sirius, again, is the brightest star in the constellation Canis Major, which is the big dog. And Sirius is also known as the dog star. So with this, the middle of summer became known as the days of the dog days. Now, in prehistoric times, and even well into recorded history, people believed that things like the sun acted willfully or were controlled by gods that acted willfully. And each year, watching the sun get lower and lower in the sky as winter approached, a fear developed that one year, one of these great cycles, that sun was going to just keep on sinking until it went up below the horizon, leaving the people into perpetual darkness and cold. So each year when the sun stopped and then reversed and started to climb higher in the sky, this was a cause for celebration. This is the time of the winter solstice, which occurs in the northern hemisphere, depending upon exactly where you are, around December 21st or 22nd. Solstice is derived from two Latin words, sol and sistera, which together mean the sun stands still, which is what it appears to do at the solstice. It keeps getting, its highest point in the sky is lower and lower and lower, and then it kind of stops and then starts getting higher and higher and higher. All over the Northern Hemisphere, this was the time for celebration. Ancient Egypt had celebrations, as did ancient Greece. In fact, in the earliest days, their celebrations included a human sacrifice. The Druids celebrated. It was celebrated in Iran, and Native American peoples, including the Pueblo and the Hopi, they had their seasonal celebrations. In pagan Scandinavia, the winter festival was called the Yule. Great Yule logs were burned and people drank mead around bonfires, spinning and listening to great tales and sagas of great deeds in the past. A boar was sacrificed to the chief god Odin, who donned a broad-brimmed hat, put on a magic blue cloak, and sped around the world at night on his great white horse. Mistletoe, which was a sacred plant because it grew on the most sacred tree, which was the oak, it was cut, and a spray was given to each family to hang over their doorways as a sign of good luck. Now, this is actually our first reminder that a lot of our holiday traditions, including the very term Yuletide, time of the Yule, are drawn from pagan ones, including decorating with garlands, wreaths, and the Christmas tree itself, along with a man who could magically speed around the world in one night. For the date of Christmas, though, now we're sort of getting into the area that lies between history and speculation. No one knows the date that Jesus was born, the day of the year Jesus was born. No one even knows for sure what season or, in fact, even what year he was born. To the extent the Bible can be trusted as a source, we can be confident that he was not born in the winter, since shepherds did not watch their flocks by night at that time of year. Their flocks would have been corralled in the winter. In fact, watching their flocks by night was most commonly done in the spring to protect newborn lambs from wolves. And that's led some to argue that Jesus must have been born in the spring, but this is a pretty thin reed on which to build such a major foundation or conclusion. And what's more, the earliest known reference in English to the word Christmas, that Feast of Christ, Christmas, was in a list of feast days and mass days that was set down in England in 1038, more than 1,000 years after Jesus died. And there was no Saints' Day listed for December 25th. Indeed, early church leaders, and I'm talking 2nd and 3rd centuries here, they argued about the day that Jesus was born. The options included January 2nd, March 21st, March 25th, April 18th, April 19th, May 20th, May 28th, November 17th, November 20th, and yes, December 25th. And at the same time, some people, such as Origen, argued that the whole thing was pointless and wrong because it shouldn't be celebrated at all. Birthdays, he said, were for pagan gods, not the one true Christian God. Even so, by the middle of the 3rd century, the idea for having such a day to celebrate the birth of Jesus was pretty well established. Nevertheless, it took some time. In fact, it took like 100 years for that notion to become formalized and for a date to be fixed. Meanwhile, in 313, Constantine the Great issued the Edict of Milan, legally allowing Christianity in the Roman Empire. In fact, he went rather beyond that. The text actually says that it was, and I'm quoting, proper that the Christians and all others should have liberty to follow that mode of religion which to each of them appeared best. Which frankly shows a lot more tolerance than a lot of our so-called right-wing so-called Christians do today. These people who every time every time of the year, they get such a kick out of playing the oppressed victim of the atheistic hordes, even though the U.S. is actually 78% Christian. Oh, and as a sidebar, and contrary to popular belief, while Constantine considered himself an emperor of the Christian people, he did not actually formally convert to Christianity by being baptized until shortly before his death in 337, and Christianity did not become the official religion of Rome until 380, 43 years after his death. All right, getting back to the point, the oldest known reference to Jesus being born on December 25th doesn't come until the first years of the 3rd century, about 175 years after he died. And it wasn't until 350 when Pope Julius I officially declared that the birth of Jesus would be celebrated on December 25th. But that just brings us back to the start. How did the date come down to December 25th? I mean, that was the question. Well, to answer that, you have to remember these developments were taking place in Rome, which by then was the nerve center of organized Christianity. That date brings us back to the winter solstice. The Romans, like many other ancient peoples, had their solstice celebrations. In Rome, it was called Saturnalia. This was originally a feast day to the god Saturn, but over time it grew to a gigantic fair of the family and home. It began with the sacrifice of a pig. It involved riotous merrymaking, feasting, and gambling. Houses were decorated with laurel and evergreens. Schools were closed. The army rested. No prisoners are executed this time. Friends visited one another, bringing good luck gifts of fruit, cakes, candles, dolls, jewelry, incense, and other things. Temples were decorated with evergreens. Processions of people danced through the streets, their faces either blackened or wearing masks and wearing fantastic hats. Masters feasted with slaves who supposedly could do and say as they pleased, which may be true, but I doubt that they actually felt particularly free to pursue the privilege, since in a day or two they'd be back to being just slaves, but supposedly they could. Anyway. And notice here, by the way, traditions including decorating your home, laurels, visiting friends, gift-giving, holiday parties. These are not Christian traditions. These are pagan traditions, Roman traditions. Now, the ancient Roman goddess of the solstice was Angerona, whose festival day was, logically enough for a goddess of the solstice, December 21st. But when Mithraism, personified by the god Mithra, was introduced in Rome in the mid-2nd century, the goddess was largely supplanted in favor of the day of Mithra's seasonal rebirth, which was December 25th. Mithra, himself a composite of earlier beliefs, became amalgamated with a Roman god named Solus Indigeni, or the native sun, a god which in turn came from the Pelasgian titan of light named Helios. This new being, this composite of Mithra and Solus Indigeni, this composite of two composites, was Sol Invictus, the invincible or unconquerable sun. And Mithra's day, December 25th, became Dies Natalis Solus Invicti, or the birthday of the unconquerable sun. When the Emperor Aurelian proclaimed Mithraism the official religion of Rome in 274, the day became an official holiday. So, put this all together. Before Constantine issued his edict of Milan, being a Christian in Rome could get you killed. Refusal to participate in the imperial cult was considered treason. During the Great Persecution carried out by the Emperor Diocletian from 303 to 311, Christian buildings in the home of Christians were burned, they were ransacked, their books were burned, Christians themselves were arrested and they were tortured, they were mutilated, burned, starved, they were forced into gladiatorial contests for the amusement of the elite. So the point is that if you wanted to celebrate the birth of the man you regarded as your savior, and by then this was pretty well established, you had to hide it. So since the time is purely symbolic and basically arbitrary, because no one knows the actual date for certain, and it's really based on tradition and nothing more, what better time to do it than during Saturnalia, when everyone else is celebrating, and so no one would notice. And what better day to pick than December 25th, when the birthday of the unconquerable sun could be thought of as the birthday of the unconquerable sun. Indeed, according to St. John Chrysostom, Bishop of Constantinople, writing in the late 4th or early 5th centuries, that is just a few decades after Christianity became the official religion of Rome, he said the Roman Church purposefully placed the keeping of Christmas between two popular folk festivals, Saturnalia and the Calends of January, in order to give Christians something to celebrate about undisturbed, while others were engaged in secular merrymaking. Now, the Calends, by the way, is the first day of each month in the Roman calendar, and in fact it's the source of the word calendar. And yes, there was a popular festival in Rome in the first week of January, and it was a significant part of the Roman solstice celebrations. By the year 354 CE, just 4 years after Pope Julius had designated it as such, December 25th became accepted in Rome as the day to celebrate the birth of Jesus. It was Christ's Mass, Christmas. Gradually, most of the Christian church agreed. Once Christianity became the legal religion of Rome in 380, the church began appropriating what old pagan customs it could, with the result that the merry side of Saturnalia was gradually adopted and adapted to the celebration of Christmas. And so that's why Christmas is on December 25th, because Christians hid within, then adapted pagan celebrations of the winter solstice. And by 1100, Christmas was the peak celebration for the entire year across Europe. But let me finish up this part by saying that even then the idea was not universally accepted. Origen's conviction that celebrating the birth of a god was for pagans, not for Christians, persisted among conservative Christians for centuries, including among the separatists and the Puritans who settled Plymouth and Boston here in Massachusetts. They regarded Christmas as a pagan celebration with no biblical justification. In fact, instead of Yuletide, Puritans called it Foolstide, which proving that no, puns are not a recent invention. In fact, there were laws against celebrating Christmas. As an illustration of the attitude, we have the Journal of Plymouth Colony Governor William Bradford, who in his entry for 1621 recalled what he labeled a passage rather of mirth than of weight. Quoting him, "On the day called Christmas Day, the governor called them out to work, as was used, but most of this new company," and here he's referring to a group of people who arrived the month before, in November 1621, on a ship called Fortune. Most of this new company excused themselves and said it went against their consciences to work on that day. So the governor told them that if they made it a matter of conscience, he would spare them till they were better informed. So he led the rest away and left them. But when they came home at noon from their work, he found them in the street at play, openly, some pitching the barn, some at stool ball and such like sports. So he went to them and took away their implements and told them that it was against his conscience that they should play while others worked. If they made it keeping of it a matter of conscience, let them keep to their homes, but there should be no gaming or reveling in the streets. Since which time nothing has been attempted in that way, at least openly. And note here that Bradford here is actually writing about this around 1631 or 1632, about 10 years later. It was not just here at home. In fact, in 1647, the Puritan-dominated Parliament of Great Britain abolished the feast of Christmas, Easter, and Whitsun, the latter of which is known in the U.S. as Pentecost. Back in the U.S. in 1659, Mass Bay Colony, that is Boston, banned celebrating Christmas altogether. The ban remained in place for 22 years, and in fact, it wasn't until 1681 that it was lifted, and even then, it was a governor of the newly restored British monarchy that did it. Despite the lifting of the ban, the first recorded celebration of Christmas in Boston wasn't for another 5 years, in 1686. And then, and for many years thereafter, Thanksgiving was the most important seasonal holiday, in New England. In fact, in the wake of the U.S. Revolution, interest in Christmas in the former colonies faded for some decades because Christmas was seen as a British holiday. In fact, it didn't become a major holiday in the U.S. until a religious revival in the early 1800s spurred renewed interest in the day, particularly in the South, as a result of which it was Louisiana in 1837 that became the first state to make Christmas a holiday. Even then, New England continued to lag behind. In Plymouth, Massachusetts, the first time Christmas was even mentioned in one of the town's newspapers, as far as anyone could tell, wasn't until 1825. As late as 1856, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote that the old Puritan feeling prevents Christmas from being a cheerful, hearty holiday. But he added, we are in a transition state. And so it proved to be. By 1860, that same Plymouth paper was filled with ads for Christmas presents, and by the end of the century, Christmas was as much a part of Plymouth and the rest of New England as it had been for the rest of the country. And we're going to take a break here. And we are back with the obvious follow-up question, which is, why is January 1st New Year's Day? Because it wasn't always. So why? In large part, the reason has to do with the convenience of the Roman Senate, a calendar almost no one uses anymore, and the stubbornness of tradition. The earliest recorded New Year's celebrations are believed to have been in Mesopotamia about 4,000 years ago. That is about 2000 BCE. Babylonians began the year with the first new moon after the vernal equinox and greeted it with a multi-day celebration called Akitu. This actually is a logical time to start the year since the vernal equinox is the first day of spring, which comes in mid-March, as I mentioned before, and it's traditionally a time of beginnings, renewals, planting crops, the birth of new farm animals, and so on. Some other ancient cultures used different days, but all, or at least almost all of these, had some astronomical or astrological significance. For example, the Egyptians used the heliacal rising of the star Sirius. This took place in mid-July and predicted the annual flooding of the Nile, which is an event so important to their agriculture. Persians used the vernal equinox, the Phoenicians the autumnal equinox, which is the first day of autumn, while the Greeks used the winter solstice, the first day of winter. All these choices carried some meaning beyond the date itself. January 1st doesn't. So why January 1st? An early Roman calendar designated March 1st as the first day of the new year, which also may explain something that you may have wondered about. If March is the first month of the year, then September is the seventh month of the year, and the Latin for seven is septem. Likewise, October, November, and December, octo meaning 8, novum meaning 9, and decem meaning 10. September, October, November, and December were named as they were because they were the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th months of the year. That early Roman calendar I mentioned was a lunar one. It was based on the moon. Now the problem is the average lunar month is about 29 and a half days, and there's no way you can match that up to a solar year of 365 and a quarter days. You're going to be off by something like 12 days a year, and it's the solar year, not the lunar year, that drives the seasons. What's more, that lunar calendar consisted of 10 months in a 304-day year and didn't even count the days between the end of December and the beginning of the year at the vernal equinox, which was apparently designated March 1st. That calendar was reformed around 713 BCE to add the months of January and February, creating a year of 355 days, still 10 days off the solar year. To correct this, the Romans from time to time added a leap month of 22 days into February, which served to overcorrect the disparity between the two calendars, giving them some time before the error again got big enough that another correction was required. Next, according to general but apparently not universal agreement among historians, in about 153 BCE, the Roman Senate moved the first day of the year to January 1st, because that was the beginning of the civil year and the time that newly elected Roman consuls, took office. So it was just felt to be more convenient to have the legal year and the civil year begin on the same day. January is also a reasonable time to start the year because January was named for Janus, the Roman god of gates, doors, and beginnings. That is the god of all transitions. And Janus had two faces in order to see both the past and the future simultaneously. Now, despite all the attempts at correction, by the time of Julius Caesar, the calendar was again seriously out of whack with the solar year. So in 46 BCE, Caesar introduced a new solar-based calendar. This Julian calendar, as it came to be called, also introduced the use of leap years to keep the calendar from drifting too far from the solar year, and came with a decree that firmly fixed January 1st as the first day of the year. Now, after the Roman Empire fell, the generally accepted year for that being like 476, and Christianity began to spread across Europe, the Catholic Church, which remember had previously adopted and adapted the merry side of Saturnalia, now felt it was in a position to downplay the pagan, unchristian festivals, such as those as the calends of January, which had come to surround the new year in Rome. So in 567, the Second Council of Tours banned the use of January 1st as the first day of the year. Now remember, this was at a time in European history when the authority of the church in civil matters as well as legal ones was all but unchallenged. In essence, if the church said it, you did it. As a result, in the Middle Ages in Europe, the official New Year started at different times in different places. The dates included December 25th, by then the traditional holiday of Jesus, the old day of March 1st, the Feast of the Annunciation on March 25th, which is right around the vernal equinox, and even Easter, even though that was a different day year to year. But remember, Julius Caesar had set January 1st as the first day of the year in 46 BCE, which means that by the time the council acted, the practice of keeping January 1st as the first day of the year had been going on for 613 years. And it was so well established that a lot of people simply ignored the official date and kept to the old one. Now, the Julian calendar was flawed because the solar year is actually a few minutes shorter than 365 days and 6 hours. So the use of leap years every 4 years actually slightly overcorrects the imbalance. A few minutes may not seem like a big difference, but the effect is cumulative. And the error accumulates over years, and by the latter 1500s, it had grown to 10 days. So in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII oversaw design of a new, more accurate calendar, which changed the role of leap years such that only century years divisible by 400, not by 4, would be leap years, the better to prevent the overcorrection of the Julian calendar. Thus, 2000 was a leap year, but 1900 wasn't, and 2100 won't be. This still leaves a tiny overcorrection, but it will apparently take something like 3,000 years for that to build up to a single day, so nobody actually cares since we'll all be using star dates by then anyway. Most significantly for our story here, Pope Gregory apparently knew a losing battle when he saw one and surrendered to tradition, restoring January 1st as the official New Year's Day for the Church. Catholic countries in Europe are quick to adopt this change, with Spain, France, and Italy doing so the very year it came out. But Protestant ones did so only gradually, suspicious that the Antichrist in Rome was trying to trick them into worshiping on the wrong days. Scotland, for one, didn't adopt a new calendar until 1600, and England, which had used March 25th as the first day of the year since sometime in the 1100s, didn't finally make the change from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar, which meant changing along with its colonies, which means it included us, until 1752, 170 years later. By that time, the Julian calendar was 11 days behind the Gregorian calendar, which was corrected by removing 11 days from the calendar. Wednesday, September 2nd, 1752, was followed by Thursday, September 14th, 1752. There are tales of riots breaking out with people believing their lives would be 11 days shorter or they lost 11 days of wages. While such sentiments existed, historians are now of the opinion that the story of riots is a myth. However, the change of calendar was an issue in the 1754 parliamentary elections, so it's very hard to credit that there was no such sentiments out there. Okay, anyway, that's it. January 1st is the first date of the year, not due to any special meaning or relevance of the date itself, but due to the convenience of the Roman Senate, the Julian calendar, which almost no one uses anymore, and the surrender of Pope Gregory XIII to the stubbornness of tradition. So in the spirit of Constantine, let me say Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Festivus. For all the atheists like me and all the pagans out there, Happy Winter Solstice. And to all of us, Happy Holidays and Happy New Year. Because like the man said, we are halfway out of the dark. Peace.